Our next panel discussion is going to be on climate change and natural landscapes. I'll be moderating. My name is Dr. Rebecca Lewison, and I've got a fantastic panel of scientists and practitioners here with me, and we'll be talking about research applications for local climate adaptation from both perspectives. Okay, so let me introduce you to our fantastic panel. Let me see if there's a reasonable way of where everybody is. No, it never makes sense. Okay. Well, I'm just going to go in order of my notes. And then if you could just give a little wave and shout out when I've introduced you, that would be fantastic. First on our panel, we have Ms. Lisa Gover. Lisa, give a little, there we go, is the director of the Campo Environmental Protection Agency. Campo Indian Reservation is in the southeastern San Diego County and is one of 12 bands of Kumeyaay. Lisa is a member also of the Pawnee Nation. She's worked with tribes across the nation on environmental and natural resource issues, and will continue to work for and with Indian tribes to formulate approaches to deal with climate change and other environmental threats. Next, we have Ms. Melanie Schlatterbeck. Melanie, thank you for waving. She's an environmental consultant for Hills for Everyone, which is a nonprofit that works on protecting environmental resources in and around the Puente Chino Hills in Southern California. Her activities with Hills for Everyone range from GIS mapping and wildfire studies to land conservation transactions, land use planning, and the impact of planning on protected natural lands. Next, we have Mr. Bob Leiter, a little wait, there we go, a longtime member of the American Planning Association and its Regional and Intergovernmental Planning Division Association. For over 40 years, Bob has worked with regional and local planning agencies in Southern California and has also worked at with federal and state agencies on natural landscape protection and watershed protection issues. And then we have, as our final panelist, Dr. Megan Jennings. So I know everyone met if you were with us for the kickoff of day one for SWAF, but just in case you weren't, Megan is a senior research scientist at San Diego State University and co-director of Institute for Ecological Monitoring and Management and one of the PIs on the CWC project. And her background is in wildlife and conservation ecology and also in land management because she's worked over a decade in working for the US Forest Service. So thank you all for joining us. I'm so glad you're here. We really have such an incredible diversity of experiences and expertise, and I'm so excited to learn from all of you. Just to kick us off, and I'm going to try to change the order up of who gets to answer first, so we don't always go in the same order. But I'd love, how about Lisa, if you don't mind? I'm going to start with you on this one. And the question I'd love to kick us off is, when it comes to climate impacts and conserving natural landscapes, what's really the biggest challenge that you face in your work and what you're most concerned about for your stakeholders or jurisdiction or in your landscape where you're working?
Well, one of the things that is often part of the practice in conserving areas on a reservation is trying to define the areas that need most protection, that are of the highest value, if you will, or have some cultural significance. And the reason that's hard is because it's all important. It all is high value. It all has cultural significance and importance. So prioritizing is the highest thing. Prioritizing the, quote, most valuable resource is the most difficult exercise that we have to try to do. So what we end up doing is creating charts and tools to help us weigh, okay, everything's important, what's the most important? And that's not easy either.
Absolutely. Melanie, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, similar to what Lisa had said, I'm gonna go to the human impact of our natural resource preservation. My area of focus has been Chino Hills State Park. By way of background, my mom actually founded that state park when I was 4, and so I have seen decades worth of changes and additions to the landscape. but it all kind of culminated in an interest in fires back in 2008 with the Freeway Complex fire, and understanding how wildfires were actually changing the landscape because they were burning our shrublands too frequently for the habitats to basically come back. And we're perpetuating the cycle of burns by having those flashy fuels that tend to be non-native grasses come back on the landscape. So, and I think that ties in closely with land use planning and where are we putting houses, and is that wise and safe to do?
Got it. Excellent. Bob, your thoughts? Oh, Bob, you're muted. Somebody had to be the first to have their mute button on. And
okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I kind of bring the perspective of urban and environmental planning. As you mentioned, I've been involved with that for about 40 years. I was planning director for 4 cities and director of planning at SANDAG, the regional planning agency, for several years, and have been consulting in that field ever since. And I plan to retire one of these days. So one of the things that I come at it from is the history of how urban planning and environmental planning in San Diego County has proceeded, and how well it's been working, and what are some of the issues and challenges that we face going forward with our multiple species plans and all the plans that are connected to the multiple species plans.
Great. Well, so Megan, oh, sorry, I'm going to turn it over to you. I heard from Lisa this issue of the need for, when we think about some of the biggest challenges about prioritization, and Melanie talking about human impacts, links to land use planning, and disturbances, in this case, a natural disturbance, a fire, which it happens at unnatural and intense frequencies. And then Bob's comment, sort of this historical perspective in Southern California. But I think all of these topics really resonate across the region. And I guess maybe you could talk a little bit about how your work is certainly informed by all of these sort of top challenges. And I'm sure we could all list more.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this sort of tees up kind of how we landed here in the first place, right? You know, my background's in wildlife ecology, and I'm very focused on connectivity. And that's why we decided to do this project, to connect wildlands and communities, because there seemed to be this gap between the way we plan for communities and the way that we plan for wildlands. So how could we better talk to each other and communicate, but then also prioritize, right? That difficult task that Lisa was talking about. We have all these important, you know, things that we need to protect, and how do we go about prioritizing that? So, and as I've heard from many of our tribal partners, that's a very Western way of thinking. So sometimes prioritization doesn't even make sense to some of our partners because so many things are important for so many reasons. But that's really driven, I think, a lot of the work that I've done leading up to this project, but also the evolution of this project, where we're really trying to respond to those concerns, those issues, and find a way to integrate data across these different sectors, you know, fire, as Melanie was talking about, and the different priorities that Lisa was talking about, cultural issues, natural landscapes, important species, and then, as Bob's saying, you know, really connect that to the way we do our land use planning and how that tiers to our conservation planning. So I think we've got some cool tools that we've been working on to, you know, help with that prioritization, help, you know, make it accessible, help visualize it, and really connect it for people on the landscape, and help with decision making. But you know, you can't just deliver; it's a conversation. And so that's, I think, you know, part of what we've been doing this project. And you know, why all of you are here is because you're important part of that conversation. Now, Becca, you're on mute.
I did it, Bob. There you go. Building on that,
Easy.
I know. I've lost my moderator street cred. You know what? I'd love to talk. First, I'm going to talk about data, and then we're going to turn to something else, because I think this project and I think what we've been hearing through the conversations throughout the day is that, like, there's a critical role for data, and there's a critical role for beyond data, other aspects of changing climate conversations and really innovating climate adaptations and building bridges. But we're going to stick on the data just for a second. And what I'd love to hear, and Melanie, I'll maybe start with you on this one, is, if you could wave a magic wand, the data products that, and obviously, this project is working on a number of them. What are the data products that you really see as critical to the work that you're doing? Because I'm guessing that lots of people who across the region are doing what you do, which is they're in a place and they're working on protecting a place, from human impacts and human activities. So I think this will really resonate. So are there specific, types of data or data visualizations that you've really felt like, oh, if I only had, or I'm really excited to use? It could be something that already exists or is developing.
Yeah, that's a really important thing, especially in my work. And by way of background, I'm a geographer. And I think one of the beautiful things about being a geographer is you're not stuck in sociology or psychology or history. It's all sorts of things, economics, land use, you name it. And using wildfire as the example, and I think I actually provided the data that I had, that Hills for Everyone had accumulated to the research project. But what we've found is that it's really siloed thinking, and I'll use fire agencies as the example. Chino Hills State Park is in 3 counties, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Orange, and abuts a 4th, Los Angeles County. And what we found were certain fire agencies had a map of a fire that ended at the county line. So you've got this wild, crazy perimeter that then had a straight line in it. And that is not how the fire burned. And so, but they were only thinking about their geography. And so I think what this research actually does is removes the silos and provides that landscape level look at really important intersections and interconnected features of the landscape, of human involvement, of transportation, of water, all of the different resources. And so I think it gives us more information, which can be challenging to digest, but with that extra information, you're able to make better, more informed decisions, whether it's as an organization, or I'll take it to the decision-making level and tie it into some of Bob's work that planners and decision makers need to know about when considering projects.
Bob, I saw you nodding. Can I pivot to you for you to build on that?
Yeah, and I think a couple of things Melanie mentioned are really relevant to the work that we're doing here in San Diego County. We have boundaries that have been set for this, what we call the sub-area plans in our multiple species conservation program structure. And those boundaries were set on what I would call a very arbitrary basis that has very little relationship to reality. And it was done for all the right reasons, because when this program was set up back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was unfunded. It was a challenge to get the ball rolling. And so we created 4 sub-areas, major sub-areas, one of which it was coterminous with the boundaries of our sewer system. The city of San Diego provides sewer service to several cities and unincorporated areas. So we did a South County or sort of a multiple species sub-area plan for those jurisdictions. We did another one for all the cities that weren't being served by the San Diego water system, and included all those cities, and that was done by Sandag. And then the county took responsibility for 2 other areas and was supposed to be doing sub-area planning for those 2 areas. And the result is all the good intentions that we all had, whether we were planners or researchers or collaborators, have made some really good progress, but there's a lot of opportunities to improve how we plan for these areas and how our planning then gets translated into proper implementation and funding. And that's a major theme of a report that I'm working on right now with Megan and some other folks, trying to explain the history and kind of suggesting how we could go forward on some of these problems.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa, but I'm guessing that this is something that'll resonate for people outside, you know, a similar, obviously a different pathway, maybe particular, but can't be unique just to, you know, San Diego was a pioneer of this, but many other jurisdictions are trying to tread this challenging path. Lisa, if love to obviously pick up on any thread that you are excited to pick up on it. The question I posed originally was, you know, are there particular data products that would really help inform or enhance, you know, the work that you're doing currently around climate adaptation?
Well, excuse me, the data and information that is most important, I said it wasn't easy to prioritize, but it is easy to prioritize in this instance, is the water data. We are entirely dependent on groundwater out at Campo, and it's in that data that we collect and that we use and that we review to determine, are we likely to see a severe drought year? Also, we don't do it by ourselves. We also get on the webinars with NOAA and others that have lots of climate data, and we try to incorporate that in. Their information is on a bigger scale, much wider, much broader, and ours is very much smaller, but we're trying to use everything, including, they don't have the information that I have on the groundwater levels, so they don't know if we're actually experiencing a drought or if we have enough water from the years before the precip that we got. So that's the other thing. Precip is the other major informer of our work.
Got it. Thank you for adding that. You know, one of the things that I think is so relevant that's already come, you know, that's come out of the conversation we had before, and I know we've been having some conversations as a panel before, is sort of the tension, and with any project, and again, I think this will be something that resonates from folks across the region, is trying to find sort of common lessons while acknowledging critical differences. It's not all the same. It looks like Chaparral, but of course there's a lot of differences, and those differences are cultural. Those differences are ecological. There are differences in terms of pressures. I'd love to hear, and who did I start with? I can't even remember last time. Bob, maybe I can start with you from your experience. I mean, I think this is, when we're doing sort of regional planning, this seems to be one of the underlying tensions. And I think this occurs at very small scales and larger scales as well.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. And, you know, having worked at SANDAG, the regional planning agency for the entire San Diego County region, what I realized and learned as the planning director there was there were so many different systems that we really needed to be looking at beyond just transportation. And as we looked at those and we looked at the infrastructure needs for those systems, we realized there was a lot of opportunities because there was a lot of overlap among those systems, and there could be better connections between those systems. But we also recognized there were a lot of challenges. And one of the things I think the CWC team has been doing, we talk about data, which is really important, but the ability to translate data into suitability maps. And I think that's a critical element of the kind of planning that the San Diego region needs to be doing, and probably a lot of other regions, is to be able to translate data into suitability maps that tell you, for example, what are the areas that are most subject to wildfire, and how are those going to change over the next 50 years in relation to climate impacts. And if you can do that kind of suitability mapping, that's a huge benefit, not only to habitat conservation planners, but to urban land use planners and transportation planners and others. And if you also include the tribal nations in San Diego, which were not part of the original MSCP, and you look at ways to better collaborate with the tribal nations on these plans, you even further expand the opportunities to do good work that's going to help everybody that lives in the San Diego region and the natural environment.
Lisa, do you want to jump in there?
No, I'm not sure even where to begin, but one of the things that we discussed the other day when we were on a call together was the multi-purpose planning documents that were developed did not take into account the tribe's priorities and specifics about the number of Indian reservations in San Diego County. They would and what ended up happening is because those tribes' lands are out in the rural areas, and uses in a lot of areas were not consumptive uses. They weren't consumptive uses of land. By that I mean totally altering the landscape, so it's not recognizable anymore as a natural landscape. That's what I mean by that. But then the county making those areas, maybe they didn't include the reservations, but those areas in and around, they kind of said, oh, okay, well, this is a good place for species diversity, endangered species kinds of areas. And so there was some sensitivity when a tribe or a number of tribes began to develop their lands, and caused some consternation with the folks who were expecting that those areas would stay pristine or as pristine as could possibly be. So because all of our landscapes are altered from the original, none of them are pristine per se, because they've been altered so in taking of the natural resources and stuff. But that's when we have real problems with off-reservation entities and people, governments and individuals themselves. So, yeah, it's a rock and a hard place for tribes, but that's the place that a tribe has been given to live and make a living on, and they will do and make decisions for themselves.
Got it, Melanie. Your thoughts. Obviously on all any of the topics we've been talking about. Whenever you're at the end, I know it's hard because we've been talking about a lot of things, but please jump in on any thread that sort of resonated for you or ideas you wanted to add.
Yeah, I wanted to add two things. One was writing on the coattails for one of the topics Bob had brought up in terms of understanding the landscape better. One of the results of a wildfire study that Hills for Everyone did, prompted by the Freeway Complex fire, basically gave us an indication of where the fires were starting and what areas were hotspots. And when I finish talking and I'm not distracted, I'll post that to all attendees and all panelists, and you can see those maps. But basically, we learned that 30% of the fires are starting along the 91 freeway. And in terms of what we should expect to see of a natural fire regime, it was supposed to be every 30 to 150 years where a fire would ignite. And the natural regime would have been appropriate. We had 2, and we found 151 fires that we were able to document. And all the rest of them, 149 fires, were started by humans in some way, shape, or form, whether it was infrastructure, bottle rockets, fireworks, equipment use, et cetera. So we did that and functionally were able to predict where it was a bad idea to build. And so if we're advocating for the protection of the natural resources in Chino Hill State Park, that information became fundamental. But the other thing, and that gets back to your question specifically of those tensions, is what we have found in Southern California is that Northern California wildfire science is being applied. And so it is not and should not be a one-size-fits-all approach. So for example, prescribed burns may be wholly appropriate in the Sierra. I don't live in the Sierra. I haven't studied the Sierra. I don't know their fire regime like I do down here in Southern California, but considering our fire regime is already completely out of whack because of the human influence, and our habitats are already type converting, that's a terrible idea to do. And so I think it's important to understand the ecological differences and even regional differences of the fire's influence on the landscape. That's my specific example. And now that I'm done, I'll post those links.
Perfect. Megan, anything you wanted to add to we hit a couple of topics on that one, but anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think part of what resonates for me is the connection between what Lisa was talking about and Bob's comments, where, you know, we have this really innovative process, this conservation planning process that I think led the way for California and even for conservation planning for the US. I mean, it was really innovative at the time, this planning. As I wrote in the chat for folks, San Diego was one of the first, but we also have similar plans in Orange County and Western Riverside County. And they were sort of groundbreaking at the time to set aside these lands in advance, do this advanced mitigation planning, you know, give us opportunities to grow as we know we need to, but to take advantage of time to be able to set aside places that were more important. But I think this creates, as Bob was sort of talking about opportunities, it creates opportunities, but also challenges. And I think one of the challenges is there wasn't that communication with some of the key partners, tribal partners in particular. And so the onus was put on them. And I also worked with the US Forest Service. So those lands were already protected. And so there was sort of, you know, a shift of, you know, where lands needed to be protected and activities needed to be focused on endangered species protection in favor of development. But then I think the other real challenge that I see is that, you know, these plans are intended to have a 50-year lifespan. And so while we talked about this in a call we had in advance of this panel, and I think it really clicked something for me, where we have an opportunity with the framework that was created, but there's sort of a challenge in getting our mindset to move in the direction of, we're about 20 to 25 years in on these plans, and we can't just sit on our laurels. We have to give ourselves an opportunity to update them, recognize that what we knew 20, 25 years ago, we've advanced, we know a lot more. We have partners who should be invited to the table to have their say and whose, you know, input should be integrated. We have new science. You know, I think we did fantastic at the time, but how can we improve what has been done and build on it? I mean, you know, I've done a lot of connectivity planning, and one question I sometimes get is, how do we retrofit the existing plan with this new information? And it's like, well, it shouldn't be that hard. But we sort of get a little bit stuck, a little bit mired in the fact that we have a plan and it has boundaries, it has some drawings on a map. But, you know, I was sort of horrified to go into a meeting where there were drawings on a map where our reservations were grayed out. And I was, you know, I said, why are these grayed out? And there was a conversation about, well, we can't tell tribes what to do. And I said, this is about collaboration. It's not about telling someone what to do. It's about having conversation. So, I mean, I think that's where that tension for me, in my mind, about having these conversations is about the challenges and opportunities and how we can sort of bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think that topic of flexibility and the dynamic nature, it's really easy. I mean, we're talking about climate change. So the second word there is change. So it seems like that wouldn't be so hard, but in fact it is. And I think it is because there's inertia in part. I think it's in part because, as Bob said, a lot of people worked really hard to put all this work into place and kind of made it from nothing. And I'm guessing, again, other areas and people throughout the Southwest have had similar experiences. Once that train has left the station, we have to be able to build new tracks, right? And we're not so good at that. And I definitely think that's been one of the take homes from a lot of the panel conversations that we've been having. I mentioned that, you know, I am a lover of data, a creator of data, and so that's often where my heart is. But I will say one of my personal experiences development through this project is the recognition and the recognition of the opportunities and the need for other conversations, right? Of course, it's not just about the science, the outreach, climate expression. I know we keep encouraging everyone to visit the art walk. And for me, that's been one of my personal sort of epiphanies of working and working with Megan and leading CWC, is like the critical nature of art to climate awareness and how that plays a role. And so that might be someone outside of everyone's wheelhouse, but I wanted to just have a conversation and a round on your experience with outreach in all forms, whether it's been education. Of course, that we think education, that's initially about kids, but in fact, education is for all of us. So it could be at any level, it could be outreach or engagement or climate expression, anything in there that you've had some experience with that's important to your work. Lisa, Bob, can I start with you? That would be great. I'm just trying to mix it up.
I was looking at all the backgrounds of everybody for today's meeting, and I see art displayed by several of them, and also at the earlier sessions. And I have a painting behind me. We weren't allowed to bring slides, but we were allowed to arrange our offices so that you could see what we liked. And my wife and I became huge fans of California Impressionist art, which was I'm not an artist, so I won't use the right language, but a genre of art in California that became popular in the late 1800s and was very popular through the 1940s and 50s, and is still popular. And there's a lot of collectors that know a lot more about it than I do. But what I loved about this art is it celebrates our natural landscapes in California. And the painters that painted those artworks, and I have behind me, there were 4 famous California Impressionists in San Diego County who were excellent artists and who fell in love with our natural environment. And those paintings inspired me as I was working in the 1990s, and from that point on, to really think about our natural landscapes differently, and to think about them as, the beauty that we all, including us urban planners, are responsible for protecting. And so that was kind of how I made the connection between art and the work that I do as a planner. And I think everybody has their own story along those lines.
Great, thank you for that, Bob. Lisa, did you want to jump in there?
I'd be glad to, and I'm thrilled to be showing off the one of the art pieces, one of my best and most amazing pieces by Regan. And just so you guys know, I know the guy looks scary, but I used to look at this painting, and I would be able to tell my approach to the day by whether or not the guy looked nice or mean. And it was really a reflection of me, right? But that's how I would know each day, what attitude needed to be adjusted, and it was almost always mine. And I do adore that. That was a gift from my brother quite a long time ago, because it's a poignant piece of work. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was, because Melanie brought it up, is she's a geographer, and that was my minor in my undergrad. So I'm a big map person, and I love to look at pictures. So art and knowing what a picture looks like in a map, and seeing when I know what the landscape is as a 3-dimensional situation, by being out at Campo and having been in the field, I can look at maps and discern, some things. I don't know how I know it. I don't even know. I went to law school. What do I know? I know a bunch of words, but you figure out things in working with smart people. And for instance, working with Megan in Nubia, they're going to tell us some things about acorns we would never know. But also, one of the things I wanted to mention real quick, because I brought it up, Megan, was Megan and Nubia have been helping out with getting some saplings, some seedlings planted out at our reservation. That I posted a picture in the in that little tool, and we're digging some holes in that in the area where we're doing a burn area rehab. But one of the things I wanted to mention, and I was thinking about this morning, was Megan and her team were able to grow a bunch of saplings because they were protected and all of that kind of thing. So we got a whole bunch of nice, viable saplings to plant out in the field. My team, the woman that's working on it at my office, she got a bunch of acorns to germinate, but only one of them made it out of the nursery out of 300. And you know, that's important to think about, because in the wild, if 1 out of 300 acorns make it into a sapling, that's pretty amazing too. So we get to look at the things like that, the chances of being able to grow a tree, and all of the same acorns and that kind of thing. It's those kinds of learning experience and remembering experiences that help us who work with tribes and in tribal offices, what we can do. And the fact is, we really can't do a whole lot. We can try though, and that's the important thing.
Thanks, Lisa. And just the project that Lisa was just talking about, we'll be posting a chat about it. It's another project that some of our team members are working on, Megan and others. And so we'll be posting about that. So if anyone's interested in learning more about resilient restoration, it just popped up right there. Melanie, your experiences with climate expression or outreach or education and how that's really central, I'm guessing given your position and the work that you're doing in Puente Chino Hills, that's got to be really critical. And I'm imagining that'll be something that'll resonate again with other folks who have similar positions with you across the Southwest.
It is. And I feel like I have a really important story to tell here. Back in the 90s, we were just starting to understand conservation biology. And the resource ecologist for Chino Hills State Park, a guy by the name of Gary Hund, said, you have to read this book by David Quammen called The Song of the Dodo. And so we did. And in the first few pages, it talks about a Persian rug and how you've got a nice complete Persian rug. But if you start fragmenting it with roads and housing projects and infrastructure, and you cut it into, 16 different squares, you no longer have the same Persian rug. And that book fundamentally changed State Park's approach to conservation, realizing that they needed to protect landscapes that were connected together. So fast forward 7 or 8 years, and my mom, who's the executive director of Hills for Everyone, which I know is weird to say, but we're in this together. She had a handmade Amish quilt, and she's giving a speech about the importance of connectivity. And she kept talking about how this landscape was entitled for development. And she'd hold up the quilt and a pair of scissors, and the audience would go, no, don't cut it, don't cut it. And, knowing that no tools that involved electricity had been used to create this beautiful quilt. And finally, she gets through the speech and she cuts the quilt in half. And the audience is in an uproar. And so we thought, we're just going to use this opportunity. And I am also a quilter, and I do use electricity. And so I took that fragmented quilt and pieced it back together with a ranger truck and a road that was now patrolling the landscape. And it was set inside of another quilt that showed California. And I turned it into something better when we purchased the other parcel that needed to happen. And it shows you how when people understand the science, even in a simple way of artwork like a quilt, they can get completely involved in wanting to protect additional land. So kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but
a super powerful story. I appreciate. Thank you for sharing with it. Megan, did you have anything to add to?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think I wouldn't be here without having connected with the Climate Science Alliance. And, I've always been interested in communicating with people. That was my job when I worked in land management, was connecting science to my colleagues who we were working on making land management decisions. But as a scientist, I think the power and impact of my work has just grown exponentially through this rich partnership. I love to make maps. I'm a horrible artist. You do not want to see anything I ever do because I can't represent anything that I've seen in real life a million times. I'm not talented in that way. But the Alliance team has the talent to do that. All the beautiful branding you see for our project is the fantastic work of Diane Terry on the Alliance team. you know, the communication, translation of some of our work. Prior projects, we haven't gotten to that stage yet, but into modules for the Climate Kids outreach program to communicate the science to kids through art, storytelling, and weaving in that science. So that has been so powerful. And then just this fantastic opportunity. We did it with an ecosystems report we did for California's 4th climate change assessment to have some art pieces for that. We've done it, you know, for some other pieces, but please visit that. I mean, I know we keep saying it, but seriously, like the art that was done for this project, it just so resonates. And having somebody take the science, the stuff that you're deep into the nitty gritty of like analytical stuff, and somebody make it into this beautiful representation of their own vision. Like Lisa's saying, like when you see that painting, what does it mean to you? It looks different depending on what your perspective is that day and how you're facing the world that day. And just one other thing I wanted to mention is the project that Lisa talked about, that resilient restoration project. For me, that's a whole other opportunity, continue connection, education, outreach, because that project is really focused on the resilience of culturally important plants for our tribal partners and the whole tribal cultural resilience, like not just these plants, but what that means for the entire culture of our tribal partners. And so, you know, part of what we're doing is this merging of Western science and Indigenous knowledge. And part of that is, as Lisa said, we had good success because my partner, Lluvia Flores Renteria at San Diego State University, you know, she's a plant pro, she's a, you know, botany expert, a whiz, and, you know, she figured out what she needed to do to get those things growing in the greenhouse. And now, hopefully with COVID restrictions becoming hopefully lessened over time, we'll be able to have tribal partners come into the greenhouse. We're sharing that back out and sharing knowledge about how to make these projects more successful. And for me, that's another important education and communication and collaboration effort.
Yeah, so powerful. And thank you for sharing that. And again, just if anyone wants to know more about that project, it's posted in the chat, the Resilient Restoration Project, as well as posted on the Engage posting board. You know, I thought one thing that we haven't touched on yet, well, Bob did a little bit, well, maybe we did touch on it a little bit, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about just the importance of environmental justice. And one of the goals of this project, and I think we've all expressed sort of the shared goal, and again, something that I think will resonate across the Southwest, is needing to have inclusive conversations. You know, part of this is to address and redress, you know, the fact that we have not been having those to the full extent, and we could talk about that more, but I also wanted everyone to kind of reflect on how you see environmental justice as really being critical to the work you do, and also to climate adaptation. I can't remember who I started with. Lisa, how about we start with you?
Oh, I feel like I'm the first one every time, but that's okay. Fine. I did tell you I went to law school, so I got an opinion, and I'm willing to share it. EJ is an interesting portion of the work that folks do in the environmental field. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but I had some friends in the early EJ movement. I was an EJ person because I was a community member in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that was the EJ, environmental justice, was about access to decision makers who are making decisions about where to place manufacturing plants and water projects and that kind of thing. So the access to the decision makers is and was and hopefully remains the whole point of environmental justice and in disadvantaged communities and other areas. And I think it's an important topic to discuss and be sure that the concerns of communities that are affected are able to be heard and discussed and resolved at the decision-making level with those folks at the table. And there you have it.
All right, Melanie, I promise to start with you next time. I'm sorry if I disproportionately not gotten you on that one, but could you add on that or share your thoughts?
Yeah, well, one of the phrases a friend of mine from Laguna Canyon Foundation coined, and maybe she heard it from someone else, was if you aren't at the table, you're on the menu. And I think it's important to recognize exactly what Lisa said, is that you need to be at the table. And in today's day and age, not only do we need to have the table, but we need to stop and say, who are we missing? Who needs to be sitting at this table with us? What community is impacted by a decision that may or may not go forward with something? And one recent example of this, and it was interesting how the evolution of my knowledge continues as you attend conferences and participate in government. And the example was given in a workshop recently that communities that were targeted for urban greening, where you're planting trees and beautifying neighborhoods, while rich people weren't necessarily moving into them, that beautification allowed for landlords to charge more rent, which made it less affordable to the community members that were living there and actually increased the disparity. And that, Bob and I had chatted about gentrification. And so it's kind of in that same vein, but I think it's important to have as many people as you can, not only at the table, but participating, because if you're not listening, then there's no point in the invitation. So you have to stop and listen. And that, I think, makes an effective, a more effective meeting.
Yeah, very important. Thanks for adding that. Bob, I know you have a lot of experience in the conversations that both Lisa and Melanie are talking about. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the report I mentioned earlier. We created, out of our analysis of all these systems and all these issues, there are a huge number of issues that we're talking about right now. We came up with a framework that was focused on what we thought were 5 important focus areas. And the first, and what we considered the most important and most overarching of all those focus areas, was environmental justice. And so in our report, we are describing in detail the history of how, in I would call the modern urban planning, say from the 1960s on, how the federal and state laws pertaining to environmental justice were developed and what they were intended to deal with, and how over the years, our view of environmental justice has expanded to include a lot of other issues that we didn't really focus on until fairly recently. And what we sort of concluded in our report is that one of the most important things that needs to happen in the future, if we're going to do really effective cross-sector planning and also work closely with researchers who know the data and know the maps better than the planners do, is to start with collaboration with all the affected stakeholders, including the tribal nations within your region, including the communities of color within your region. And you really need to have an open table for all of those folks to be part of the initial discussion of any update to a plan that you're going to do. And I really think that's very important in the realm of natural landscape and the update in our region, the updates of our multiple species plans and our sub-area plans and all of the other plans that are connected to those. Our conclusion is that our multiple species program, our planning program, has been really good and it's met a lot of our vision. But the plan itself, as I think one of you mentioned, is totally out of date. You shouldn't have a plan that's intended to cover 50 years worth of habitat protection if you don't update it at least every 10 to 15 years. And as far as I know, there's been no comprehensive update of the multiple species plans. And to make it worse, most of the sub-area plans either haven't been done yet, or if they've been done, they haven't been updated either. So we have some huge deficiencies in our planning process for the natural landscape that are, if they're not remedied, are going to create a lot of problems for a lot of people. And you know, we've got some ideas about how that could be made better, but it starts with, in our view, with environmental justice.
I love the link between thinking about environmental justice in this context of the dynamic nature of the work that we're doing, the fundamental need for flexibility and adaptability as critical to resilience. So we're really just, I've heard everyone sort of say that we see environmental justice as part of that critical, like flexible, resilient nature. Megan, didn't mean to, I know I didn't turn to you, so I'd love to hear any thoughts you have.
Yeah, I am not an expert in environmental justice, but what I do know is that if I don't ask and I don't listen, then I don't learn. And so, every year that I do this, every day that I do this, I learn more from talking to people with more diverse perspectives, different perspectives than I have. And while most of my work is in, our more rural areas in the backcountry of San Diego and other parts of Southern California, and there are inner city issues we need to consider. I also think about those rural communities. Those are often the more affordable places to live. And then of course, where many of our tribal partners are. And I've been so enriched by that exchange and learning, because if you don't ask and then you don't listen very carefully, as I think Melanie really put it very well, then there's no point in having these conversations or trying to do this work because you're not going to be effective.
The talk once, but listen twice.
Yeah.
Adage is an important one.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on our the last 5 or 6 minutes of our panel. And I think where I wanted to close out is thinking about, think about it in terms of successes, also ongoing challenges or barriers to how we can take science, work that into planning, and actually get things done, right? The implementation. So if we think about that trajectory, and maybe each of you, and from a scientific perspective and a practitioner perspective, would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I do see that as sort of our critical path that we are on when we think about climate change and natural landscapes. Melanie, I'm definitely starting with you.
Thanks. So I think one of the reasons our organization has been so successful is we've evolved our thinking and we've adapted to the circumstances as that increased knowledge has occurred. And we then take that information and synthesize it so that we can provide it as an educational tool to all sorts of folks. But what we've found is the 3 most important are the public, press, and our legislators, especially their staff members. And so if you have those 3 components aligned, you are likely to be more successful.
Great. Bob, your thoughts on that? This idea of what some of those successes or challenges or barriers as we try to take science into planning and implementation?
Well, I'll focus on one of the challenges because, again, the research we've done recently on the history of landscape level planning in San Diego County, which is parallel to what's going on in Orange County and Riverside County and other counties in California, is that one of the disconnects that was discussed, I thought very well during Megan's session on fires, wildfires are for San Diego County, with the exception of maybe coastal communities, and even they are affected. Wildfires are going to be one of our biggest threats, and they are already, but they're going to impact us in different ways. And the fire season is come almost all year instead of just in the the summer and spring and fall of Santa Ana's. We've had major winter wildfires now in San Diego County that have created huge impacts on public safety and public health. And that's information that our researchers on our project through UCSD have been able to quantify and teach us as planners. And the comments that were made earlier about gaps and the challenges, I think the conversation about our wild severity zone maps that are produced by CAL FIRE And the fact that those are seriously out of date and they haven't incorporated the research on the impacts of climate change on our wildfire seasons and the impacts of our transmission towers, electric transmission towers on fire risk. And there's a lot of things that the last version of them didn't do that the next version of them could do. And if that one area was focused on, I think you'd see much better regional plans and much better local plans to address climate impacts. And so I think that's, for me, that's an important takeaway.
A great specific challenge for our area, but one that I'm guessing will resonate for folks throughout the Southwest. Lisa, your thoughts on this as we wrap up?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I was thinking when Bob said fire season's gone to year round, I was like, yeah, people are stupid all year round. And that's what first popped into my mind, was because Campo Indian Reservation has always, and the Campo people have always known about fire and fire risks and used fire to help to alter landscapes and to create beneficial areas. And so fire is one of those things. They started getting really big, in the last 20 years, and threatening and invading in areas that by a scale that was not comprehensible at one time. But one of the things that I think is important for us to know, and this is just one of my wrap up things about climate change, is, we're experiencing climate change, global warming. It is, and there's no denying it. But people are, stupid year round. But for the last 6 years, people have known that this is coming, and so now is the time to be aware that the temperatures are getting warmer. We've reached those surpassed those goals of no return. If we get to this point, there's no return. But the other thing is that wildfires are a part of nature, and people stupid is a part of nature, and disease that we've gone, the COVID pandemic was totally foreseeable. We knew something like this was going to happen, and yet we have people that deny that this is climate. We are living climate change. We are living global warming. This is what they said was going to happen 30 years ago, and I think 60 years ago, when I was not quite, I was just a baby. This is not any surprise. So and so a lot of times I get faulted for my approach or my attitude about this, because you've got such a bad attitude, you should have a positive attitude. And I'm like, people are stupid. And this has been going on for a long time, and now we're having conferences about it and talking about it and making fun of people who don't understand that this is what's happening, and we're living it. And unfortunately, a lot of Indian people died from it, as well as not just the invasion that took place 500 years ago, but this COVID pandemic. A lot of Indian people suffered and died, and there were seats at the table missing, and it's very sad. And yet we'll go on.
Well, it's a great point, and I want to thank all the panelists. Lisa, thank you for sharing that. I know part of the reason we're here is to share and learn, and to bring more people to the conversation. So I want to thank all of you for all of your thoughts and insights and your willingness to share them with us all today. This was really fantastic. Encourage everyone to continue the conversation on the posting board. The panel will all be checking, and we'll be checking to make sure that any questions that you post will be answered. From here, we're going to be taking a 10-minute stretch break and come back at 1:50, where we really hear from planners and our advisory group to really hear about how all this information we're talking about can really be practically applied. So thanks again to our panelists. Thanks for everyone to participating, and look forward to continuing the conversation at 1:50.